My name is Alex Rosales, and I'm working with this amazing team of presenters and organizers here to help offer the Food Summit. As I mentioned earlier, we have a series of conversations that are that you guys are listening to, and that's being live streamed. And one of the sessions that we wanted to highlight is the work that's being done by community-based organizations throughout the Rio Grande Valley. Now, this was a theme that came up because many of the folks on our advisory groups are work for these community-based organizations, and frankly, they're doing a lot of the great work addressing some of the issues around food, food security, farmer training, and just health and well-being of our communities. So today's panel, this panel is called Fueling Change, Models for Community Action Towards Food Equity and Food Security. And it's really to try and discuss what community action looks like, in its many examples. And then, of course, we're going to ask some of these panelists questions about what we've learned from working in these spaces, and then just get them to start dialoguing about how we can continue to work together, or perhaps leverage each other's wealth, and to be able to amplify our work even more. So let me introduce our panelists, starting with Reverend Michelle Vernon, who is with the First United Methodist Church. She's a pastor with the church and has been serving in various roles since 1995. Her mission is to provide genuine hospitality, create space for honest conversation, value our time together, and care for all people, which she believes is the best way to invite people to God's table. Currently, she serves as the pastor for Edinburgh First United Methodist Church in the Rio Grande Valley, which is just down the road. And she actually genuinely invites everyone to sit with her, share a cup of coffee, a meal, and a conversation. And according to Michelle, there's always a place for everyone at God's table. And so there's always a place for everyone at her table as well. So thank you, Pastor Michelle. Next to her is Annalise Lotman, who is with the Texas Rural Cooperative Center, the Center for Sustainable Agriculture and Rural Advancement. Annalise is an expert in cooperative development with more than 15 years of experience serving community-led businesses and cooperatives. Her areas of specialization include governance, formation process, rural revitalization, and co-op financing. She's worked for over 5 years as a small-scale agricultural producer and has a strong track record providing culturally relevant training and technical assistance to farmers, ranchers, workers, and business owners throughout Texas. Her contributions have resulted in the creation of multiple Texas cooperatives, including the Yard to Market Co-op, where she was a founding member, the Central Texas Farmers Co-op, the Frontera Farmers Coalition, the Equality Home Care Co-op, and the Frontera Groceries Co-op. She also serves on the boards of Yard to Market Co-op, the Black Star Co-op, and the Austin Cooperative Business Association. And when she's not busy cooperating, you can find her out in her own garden. We also have Veronica Dimas, who is with the Brownsville Wellness Coalition, also known as Vero. Her friends call her Vero, so I think I've earned the right to call her Vero. She's the executive director of the Brownsville Wellness Coalition, a 501c3 nonprofit organization in Brownsville, Texas, where she was born and raised. She worked in the legal field for over a decade before obtaining her Master Gardener certification and pursuing her passion for local food systems. In 2014, she became the Farmers Market Manager for the Brownsville Wellness Coalition, and in 2016, she was appointed the Executive Director. As Executive Director, she's created and directs 5 additional programs for the organization, including urban farms, community gardens, a mobile fresh food market, healthy cooking and nutrition education, food distributions, and movement and exercise program. Anything that has to do with health and wellness, they cover. So she advocates for healthy food, for food security and mental health, and serves on several local boards, as well as the Texas Health and Human Services Commission SNAP Working Group and the Big Green DAO Governance Board. She is bilingual and the mother of 4 daughters. She enjoys community service, gardening, walks, and visiting farmers markets all across the country. Our last panelist is Alexis Haragui. Alexis is a recent graduate of UT RGV earning her BS in Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems. She's actually one of our first graduates of the program, with a minor in nutritional sciences. While on her journey, she became passionate about keeping food local, finding ways to make food accessible to all, and educating the youth about all things sustainability and all things food. She started her farming journey working at the university's Hub of Prosperity Farm, and where she was able to see and experience how the Upper Valley food system is working together to make a difference in our community. She is currently the urban farm manager with Scently, a nonprofit organization where she's able to bring her passions together all in one place. So, we've got an amazing panel of women activists and advocates. Where there was a question about gender on the last panel, so we flipped the script, and we're actually highlighting the amazing work of these women. So let me join you guys on stage. So the impetus of today's conversation was really to just, first of all, elevate your work. So we prepped this by asking you guys to send in a couple of pictures, which we might show here on the board as you talk. We want you guys to expand on the work that you're doing. So let me bring up my questions here. Let's see. Okay, we'll start. We'll start with you, Annalise, because you're kind of looking at all of this from a kind of a higher elevation in your professional work, and then also working from the ground up in your own personal work. So in your work, you help individuals and organizations work together towards community solutions for individual needs. Can you discuss why that approach? Tell us a little bit more about it so the audience knows exactly what cooperative means, and why do you guys focus on this approach as opposed to some of the other business models that exist out there?
Thank you. Yes. So first of all, a definition of what a cooperative is. A co-op is a business solution to a shared need. And so when we're talking about starting a cooperative, we're talking about working with a community, working with a group to identify what needs they have, and then to pinpoint which of those needs might have a business solution. Not every need has a business solution, but some do. And certainly many of the needs that we talk about in agriculture and in the food system have a solution that might come from shared ownership of a business. In terms of individual versus collective assistance and who we choose to focus on and why our focus is on this cooperative model, my observation, and I'm not alone in this, is that individual action is kind of a myth. We're all acting in the context of our community, of our society, of our region, of the resources that are available to us. And so acting intentionally when we think about pulling together a cooperative community means identifying individual needs and then seeking a collective solution to those individual needs. So when we talk about those shared needs that form the basis of a co-op, we're not talking about something that comes from, well, okay, sometimes we're talking about something that comes from an analysis of what society might need. But really, in order to get a co-op moving, we're sitting in a room full of individuals, and we're identifying where their needs overlap. And then we're working together to find where their abilities, skills, and areas of expertise might also overlap. And then we take the skills and expertise that they already have, the needs that they have, and we help match them up with resources and people to fill the gaps so that they can create something that is a functioning whole and helps them move towards solving whatever problem brought them together in the first place.
Okay, so this is a great segue because Reverend Michelle, you have been really instrumental in the success of the Hub of Prosperity Farm, which is, of course, on your property. And so we've heard a little bit about the Hub of Prosperity from our student Carlos earlier, and it's become a really dynamic space. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on kind of the church's view of that space, what it means for you and your constituents in terms of a community-based effort, and what benefits does it provide? What benefits does it provide both the church and its community, the UTV and its community, which ultimately is the same community as Annalise mentioned?
So we have a vested interest in the success of the Hub of Prosperity. And to start with, it's the back 5 acres of our property that was sitting unused. With all the discussion about, potentially building, potentially whatever, 20 years down the road, it was still an unused plot of 5 acres. And so as we look at the best use of our property for our specific mission as a church or as a nonprofit religious entity, the best use is for people, and whatever that looks like, however that's developed. Within that conversation, it is a natural space for us to have partnered with any sort of agriculture, but specifically UTRGV, a mile down the road. Most of our members have some attachment to the agriculture farming industry in the Valley, whether they themselves were farmers, whether it was their family business, and then the other half are educators. It was just the most natural sort of piece for us to plug into. When we talk about what that farm looks like now, whether it was the most suspicious member of what are we doing with that back 5 acres to the most serious advocate, now everyone at the Hub is considered part of the EFUMC family. We want to see them wherever we see them. We keep the office stocked. We invite them to everything that happens because they're part of the family, and they recognize the value. They are some of the core supporters of the market. They are some of the core supporters of those individuals. They look for them in the course of the day. If I haven't stocked somebody's favorite snack, somebody reminds me that somebody's missing their frozen Kit Kats or their high protein. It is family. When we talk about food security and food equity, none of that happens if you don't care about the people in your community. And so the Hub has reinvigorated the church's eye in its community. What does it look like to be a good neighbor? What does it look like to make that space usable to the university? What does it look like to see young people? If you'd asked me for a reason why the Hub is important, I can just point to the previous panel and say there why what we do matters now. It's not so much bringing them into the church, but knowing that there's a space for them to belong and tap into their community.
Yeah, great, thanks. I mean, this idea of collaboration and cooperation is kind of the theme here, right? Because as community-based organizations, or organizations that are embedded in your communities and you serve a specific constituency, obviously you guys provide certain benefits, and we all have different metrics. So like, for example, Vero, with the Brownsville Wellness Coalition, you guys have a bunch of different initiatives that we mentioned in your introduction. I'm curious about, as an organization, what metrics do you use to define your success? And of course, like, how does certain metrics that aren't often included in like grant applications and things like that, things like dignity or a sense of belonging, how is that included in your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think the important is to identify that an organization like Brownsville Wellness Coalition measures the success through being part, delivering that mission, right? That initial mission that was thought about when the organization was created. Maybe it kind of changes through the years and through the need and through the community around us. But I think one of the things that I can have a testament to is an example is our strategic plan. In 2018, we created a strategic plan and we worked with consultants, and it was a grant through the Legacy Foundation, through the Valley Baptist Legacy Foundation, and we needed to have a roadmap to identify the programs that we were delivering. As most grassroots organizations, we were flying the plane or building the plane as we were driving it, and that came with a lot of challenges and learning abilities. And one of the things we talked about was, changing or pivoting from programming. So we did that in 2018 and put into place with my board of directors in 2019, and then guess what happened? COVID. And then when we were ready to deliver that, COVID happened. And so we had to pivot. And that's when we thought that all of our programming we were measuring it through the community, right? It was a need that we were seeing that the community needed. So we had to pivot into food distribution, food insecurity. We did have plenty of food. Farmer Dave came to me and said, Ms. Vero, we're closing the farmer's market, we're closing La Cocina Alegre, we're closing all of our programs. What am I going to do with all this food that's in the farm? We had started our food distributions. We had no idea what food distributions meant, first of all, because that was not part of our work. But we partnered up, and that's where the collaborations kicked in. So we talked to United Way and the RGV Food Bank and came with the folks that had the expertise, and how could we help, and how could we be part of this, right? And since that first year, we gave out over 96,000 bags of food and produce to our community. And the first food distribution took us about 8 hours because clearly we didn't know what we were doing. But we were able to measure a lot of these the metrics took place by the community, right? The community was asking us, this is what they needed, this is what we thought that we were working on to fill that gap of that food insecurity, and we worked with community partners to make that successful.
Yeah, I mean, the Brownsville Wellness Coalition, I remember when you first started there, you said in 2014, and then, of course, you were tapped to be the executive director in 2016. And I think we talked at least once a year, and I can see that journey. I mean, you guys are doing some tremendous work, but we've all had to pivot and just reconsider and rethink our priorities. Cently, for example, who Alexis you work with, they were actually born like during COVID, if I'm not mistaken, that organization. And that organization has some member farms, and you guys are farming in a very cooperative way. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that model, and what are the goals of Cently, and how do you know that it works?
Well, first off, thank you for having me here. So Cently Cooperative is unique in the way that it congregates a lot of several small farms together and help them make local produce accessible to the community. And so what's really great about this is that, Cently alone cannot provide all the items due to various reasons. So because of this, everybody just pitches in and offers the produce that they individually grow, and it comes together. And this also helps the community have this, all these local produce available here in the Valley. And as we, so when we do this, Cently has a platform that the consumers use, and they're able to have access to all these products that these local farmers have available. And the great thing about it is that all these are local, and they are they're locally grown here, and Cently has these available on a weekly basis. So not only does this benefit the farmer by having their produce accessible for the community, but also the community is able to access all of this vegetables and get the nutritious, affordable options here in the Valley instead of having to rely on other areas when we have all this available here. So it is a really great example of the farmer and the community coming together, and they begin to develop this really beautiful relationship. And I think it's been working really well.
I mean, I think so. I mean, I know that the Hub of Prosperity is a partner, and I know that we have dialogued very closely with Cently, and there is, cooperation not just in terms of the produce, but in the programming, and we're really excited. I mean, obviously it takes a lot to build these relationships. I mean, I'm gonna just reveal something. Alexis was our student in our program, so the relationship was already born years earlier, and so it's easy to build these kinds of relationships when we have, something else in common, and I wanted to ask you, Annalise, your organization is in the business of trying to build relationships, right? And we all know that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy. In today's world, when we're trying to be a little bit more efficient, sometimes things get less personalized. I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit about the power of that strategy of building relationships and some of the challenges I think that you see kind of moving forward, envisioning food systems where, more and more we're trying to just like kind of give barcodes, and, or do Zoom calls and not so much kind of handshakes and meetings that you have on the pictures that you show on your pamphlets.
Yeah, absolutely. For us, what we've seen is that for a cooperative to really be successful, to not just start up, but to thrive and survive, there are two key elements. One of them is, like I was saying before, a real shared need, a need that's compelling enough to keep the members of the co-op, the owners of the co-op, coming back to use the co-op again and again. So there's that compelling need that's so important. And the other thing that's essential is trust, that those members of the cooperative really have each other's best interests at heart, even when they have different ideas about how to reach a certain goal. And they can trust that the other members, a member of the co-op who might disagree with them, still has the best interest of the collective at heart. And the way that we build that trust is through repeated time spent in places together. I mean, it can be a virtual place, but there is a really clear need for individuals to take time away from their other activities, to turn on their camera if it's a Zoom meeting so that they are present in that virtual space, to share a meal together, to take that time over years. And so what we think about when we're trying to help people crack the nut of how to do that is we think about the places that already exist in society and in the particular culture of the people who we're working with to start a co-op, the places that already exist where that kind of relationship building happens. And we try to mimic that, at least in some way. So we look at churches, we look at book clubs, we look at community activities that get people to come back again and again at least once a month. And we just look at like, what are the factors there? What is it? It's not just meeting that stated kind of business need that was the impetus for the co-op. It's feeding people's social needs in a way that is really, really essential to build something that's going to keep people coming back again and again and caring about each other.
Well, I think you can't replace in real life events, right? I think we've learned that through COVID. I think it just basing on what you said about the safe space, it takes that safe space, especially in the area that we live in, right? We're providing that safe space that you can come and share or ask for food or ask for help or ask for the resources and the knowledge to be able to grow your own food. People usually have a misconception. What if you give me a bag of food, what do I have to give you in return, right? So we have to be very aware of those things and be empathetic and understanding. And so I think you cannot, that's the replacement. You can't replace in real life events. This wouldn't be as fun as sitting right here next to each other and talking to each other in front of an audience.
Yeah, I think the challenge that we heard in another panel earlier today, there is kind of this this economy that we are participating in now, where it's in real life, and we have different values, we have different metrics of how we're seeing success. But a lot of the world has a different, they're a little bit more transactional. You have to go with the lowest price. For example, Ms. Woodrum said, hey, the problem with organic is it's so expensive. And we have certain rules and regulations and budgets that we have to, that are our limits in how we interact. And so that's why I think sometimes it's great to have the diversity of interactions, the diversity of organizations that are looking at other models of how we interact with our communities. For example, I know you, Pastor Michelle, you guys have this once a month food distribution, a food bank where you give food to the community, and you've talked about some of the challenges and the differences, for example, about your food bank with, let's say, the standard food banks, the RGV food bank and other food banks. I was wondering if you could tell us how there's a difference there, right? About how you give out food and measure success, as opposed to how other organizations have these specific requirements, these limitations, and how there's a diversity there that I want you to highlight.
So in the scheme of things, we are a very small element. We can give away about 100 bags, and it started as, many years ago as just emergency food, and then with bringing in the expertise and the connections of a Methodist Healthcare Ministries program called the Wesley Nurse that immediately gets you more connected into less accessible areas of your community. For us, that meant built-in trust in the colonias, that we could reach into those communities, that they could trust that what we were bringing had no strings attached. Because we're small, because we are dealing very locally, it is less efficient for us to try to procure food from, like, say, the food bank or from other outside sources. We don't have the space, we don't have the refrigeration. So we're looking that in the course of that week that leads up, how we're accommodating food pantry staples, things that are shelf stable, and then as a church and a local community, we're completely self-funded, how do we make better choices about what we're distributing so that people are getting better nutrition? So instead of all canned goods, what does it look like to provide fresh fruits and vegetables? What does it look like, instead of just canned chicken or canned tuna, 10-pound bags of chicken that get frozen and then distributed in a way that we are not causing any health problems because the bag of chicken's been sitting outside for an hour. And so moving through that, because of COVID, initially we were a weekly food pantry that every Monday between 8 and about 11, which all happened in under 30 minutes, because if you're in the Valley and you're looking for support, you get there early, you wait in line, and it goes very quickly. So weekly, we could provide for about 20 or so people, and because we brought them inside, we could help provide other resources, whether it was prayer or looking for jobs or meeting with the Wesley Nurse to have other health concerns addressed. When COVID hit, that all changed, and we had to find a way to distribute that was safe and that could meet the needs of our community. And so we started doing drive-through food pantries. So it's all ready, cars line up, and as they come up, we just hand in the bags and offer a blessing. We don't have time, nor the inclination, if I'm very honest, to ask for people's ID and make sure that they are within a certain zip code, which often comes with when you procure food from specific sources, that they have metrics they have to meet, and part of them meeting their metrics is you meeting their metrics, and that's a lot of work to put food in the hands of people who need it. So we don't do it that way. So people come in, and if you have a need, you get in the line, and the only questions we ask are, would you like it in the front seat or the back seat? And that's how it moves, and it moves very quickly. Short of some time, is there a way we can pray for you? Is there something else you need? And then try to meet those needs in its place. And so from 20 families a week, we now look at 100 plus a month. It incorporates various members of our community, from our scout troops to the hub, people who, when the hub has extra produce, it gets incorporated into those bags as well. We've worked out a relationship with Buster Lind. We purchase our quote-unquote $5 bags of fresh produce, which ends up being significantly more because they deliver it that morning and include whatever else that doesn't need to be or can't be sold but needs to be distributed that week. And they include that. So we create community collaboration and relationship and partnership. And part of the challenge now is if they're coming from the colonias and you have a certain identity that you've established with and a relationship, there is a shifting face of what underserved and underemployed looks like. And so what does it look like to meet the needs beyond the colonias? Because most of our educators now qualify as underemployed and underserved. And how do they get in line and feel that they, there's a dignity issue, there is a privacy issue. So we make it very clear, if you have a need, you come, and we're not going to ask you any questions. You don't have to prove any eligibility, and your privacy and your dignity is intact.
So this is where we're seeing like the community-based organizations, like the ones that you guys are part of or trying to help form. This is not a business as usual model, right? I mean, and Alexis, you've studied sustainable ag. I know that you've taken courses that talk about the difference between business as usual models and these alternative models that are associated with sustainable food systems. In terms of your role at Scently, and then of course, you could talk about your role as the leader of your household, as a mother of 3 kids. What do you think? How promising are these different models that you're involved with and you're listening to, and what are the challenges that you see from these models?
Well, first off, I want to say y'all are doing a fantastic job with helping your community. Before I even was a student here, I didn't know many things about the food system. It wasn't until I was immersed into the agriculture field and working at the hub and now at Scently, I see how things work in the food system and how the networking is here. And it's really awesome. There's many organizations all across here in the Rio Grande Valley, and one thing though that, like as Vero had mentioned about COVID, once COVID hit, that's when people really started taking an interest in what they can do to live a more sustainable lifestyle. How to grow their own food, how to take care of their families, because many people didn't have access to fresh produce when COVID was around. They had to rely on local farmers. And that's really important, that the community as a whole supports their local farmers, because you never know when you're going to need them. We're always here. And another thing is that also it's really amazing how all these organizations, not only do they provide food, but they also provide resources, very valuable resources, such as educating the community on how to grow their own food, how to, for example, Scently had a workshop about high tunnels last week. So, and all these are free classes, and I feel that there is a need that we as a community need to get the word out there that there are these resources available, to everyone, not just people in the agriculture field, but it maybe we as a community need to come together and, like, you know, just announce it, like start a campaign, start some type of social media spreading of the word here, you know, that we have many things available here in the Valley. And I think it's important also to partner up with other people. Like, for example, you know, nutrition. Nutrition is a huge thing that is needed here in the Valley. And it would be so great to see maybe, like, you know, the health professionals come together, help partnering up with the local farmers, you know, these organizations to bring, you know, to make it known that we have these resources available to them, as well as I know that some school districts have started incorporating local produce into their children's nutrition program, and that is amazing. Like, that is wonderful. You know, along with that, not only are they incorporating, you know, local produce, but they are also teaching about Texas agriculture. You know, I'm sure these kids are super fascinated to find out that, oh my gosh, my carrot comes from this farm here down the road or something, you know, and it just opens their minds and lets them think about these things, because many don't know what a common thing looks like a radish or something, you know. And I think we need to really spread the word out and let it, you know, come together as a community to bring these resources here and let it be known that we have these resources. And so it's fascinating to see, you know, so many organizations coming together for this reason. So I think, you know, we support each other, and it's great to see this happening.
You know, Alexis, you mentioned something, and that's why part of why we have this panel, right, is to applaud and recognize the work of these organizations to try and build these alternative models for business, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, I mean, you know, there's a saying that systems are perfectly designed to get the results they get, right? So here we're sitting in one of the most agriculturally rich areas in the country. And as the dean, as Dr. Enseta, the dean, mentioned earlier, you know, despite all this agricultural bounty, we have some of the worst outcomes when it comes to food, access to food and nutrition, these health outcomes that are really rooted in food, right? And so the system that we live in here in the Rio Grande Valley is designed to get those results, arguably, right? And so whether it comes to school food procurement, whether it comes to health and wellness education, obviously we have such a long way to go, right? And interestingly, this COVID exposed that, right? Suddenly, where do we get our food when the grocery stores close? And I think there was a general awareness that said, oh my gosh, there's all these fruits and vegetable farmers all across the Rio Grande Valley who suddenly also can't sell their food because shipping channels are closed, or, you know, the bridge to Mexico is closed. And so I think there was a heightened awareness of a lot of these small farmers in particular, and Terra Preta Farms was one of them. The work at the hub, all of a sudden people were looking at those places. We need food. Can you help us? You know? And I think the question of how do we help ourselves really came to the forefront, right? That's this idea of resilience. You hear in all these buzzwords that we talk about. So I'm wondering, for example, for each of you guys, if you can talk a little bit more about that moment when you realize that the work, that these alternative models that you guys are working with all of a sudden became that much more important, number one, and then also that you yourself had to pivot a little bit. Vero, you already mentioned this a little bit about how you guys had to pivot, but it wasn't like you guys could like regroup, you know, because our communities like needed help even more. And so just tell me, like maybe each of you guys or a few of you guys just can volunteer and tell me a little bit about how all of a sudden we needed to step up almost, right? Or lean into this kind of new role and importance that everyone started to acknowledge. And then the second part of that question is that, you know, all of a sudden we see this kind of re-entry into post-COVID life, and then all of a sudden, like the visibility of our efforts started to go away a little bit. The business as usual model is starting to come back in, and we want to hear you guys talk a little bit about how we can take advantage of the closing window of opportunity we have to really elevate the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I can take that one first. The first point of that I wanted to make was when that did happen and we had to pivot, I think the reality hit us really quick about capacity, right? We were a small team and we were trying to function like the large food banks that had staff, that had semi-trucks, that had, the equipment to be able to deliver these food bags, right? So that hit us in it was a reality, right? But we came we partnered up with United Way and a group called Get Shift Done. I said shift, y'all. I said shift. So they were furloughed wait staff, and they were all over the country. So it's an organization started in Dallas, I believe, and they were paying for staff to be able to help us. And from there, we were able to gain great capacity in our end. We actually have 2 of our staff now. And so a little background on Brownsville Wellness Coalition. It started in 2008, and it was a very small organization. And also, I wanted to make the point when you talked about systems, of how things just do not happen overnight as we're used to on the internet. One of our panelists before said, everyone is so hooked on their phone, and it's true, right? Because we're that instant gratification. You say, Google, tell me what the weather is, and Google tells you immediately, right? But all of these systems are not, it takes time to build and to make these successful. So those measurements they're real, they're true, and as a nonprofit, you feel it, because we have, our ups and downs as a nonprofit. So with that said, then we were able to gain in capacity. We were able to have a bigger team. Now Brownsville Wellness Coalition has a team of 6 full-time employees, never heard before. And this is as a health and wellness organization. This is our very first year that our staff has health insurance. Right? And we're talking about something that is really important, not only having access to food and being able to know how to grow your own food, but the mental health wellness, the physical, right? Being able for an organization to provide medical insurance, dental insurance. Farmer Dave was over the moon January 1st, 2023, when he knew that he could take his son for the first time to an eye appointment and to a dental appointment. So all of those things that capacity comes from, all of those things are important to measure and to acknowledge too as a nonprofit. And things do not happen instantly as they do on the internet. And the other part of the question was, what was the part of the question? I lost it.
It's like how do you take advantage of this increasingly small window to kind of step into this role as part of the systems change, right? Because COVID allowed organizations that were capable of shifting quickly, like
right.
Small community-based organizations. Like the large industries could not. H-E-B is just shut down.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's what happened with our farmers market. The farmers market, even though it's in an open space at Linear Park, we were closed for 9 months. So that hindered a lot of our farmers, our valued good vendors, or even our artisans, that were affected by this. But once we opened back up, we had 1,500 people last week at the farmers market in Brownsville for Easter weekend. We had 1,500 people. We had an Easter egg hunt, and in the history of all the years that we did Easter egg hunt, we had over 500 Easter eggs. It was 2 minutes they were gone, right? There were 2 minutes we were gone. And most of our vendors are selling out before the end of the day, before the end of the farmer's market. So I think that brought bittersweetness to our industry, but it takes time. It takes time to learn this. It takes time to measure this. It takes time to understand it and to create that safe space and that trust again, because we were worried that once we were going to open the farmers market back up, our vendors were not going to want to come back. And most of our vendors, as you know, our farmers are over the age of 60, right? And most of these folks, we needed to support them somehow. And plus, they were tired, we lost some, their capacity was not the same. So we provided a lot of that space for them and those extra resources that we were talking about earlier, and we were able to leverage all that stuff. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was also the dollar amount. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? When you're a nonprofit, people want to pay for infrastructure. People want to pay for tools and seeds and dirt and soil. How about the people that are delivering the programs, right? The people that need the health insurance. That's the big struggle when it comes to nonprofits. So we were able to make great connections and collaborations, not completely great, but we're still working on some of those folks, right? But we were able to learn other funding resources to be able to support a lot of this.
We're going to get back to this funding issue, but I was wondering if any of the other panelists want to respond to that first question.
So from a church's perspective, when COVID came and many of us had to shut down for safety and protection reasons, when you reopen, it's hard to get people to come back. I mean, in an area where most people have already devalued, like corporate worship and those things that I hold dear to my heart and find like extreme value to, we've already created a new culture that says that isn't a value anymore. But when you look at what happens on the property, like if you let go of the idea that church is in the building and instead it's how we nurture community and nurture relationship, and the hub created an avenue where people could come, be out in open air, it was safe, they could have community, they had community, all of these resources. Well, you know, I'm thinking the hub is awesome for us and didn't understand the kind of attention it was getting at our, say, governance body level, like at the conference level. And so I'm sending things like homemade granola and pickled items to cabinet meetings as, look, this is the fun thing we've got going on. So there are always people on our property, and that was our big win. But then it became a different conversation for us because I have countless colleagues who are pastors of churches with unused property that can't build, that can't even restore what they had before. And so then it becomes, well, how are you having conversations with your local school districts, with your local universities to do something like this with your unused property that's going to benefit the community, that's going to benefit the people in your neighborhood, that's going to provide these other resources? Like, how do we create this model that might not be at a university level? Because everyone's very excited about a community garden until it's their plot that they take care of. And it's a very different conversation to have a farm versus a plot. Do you know what I mean? Like, that farm provides security. Like, that is a different conversation to have for a neighborhood that says, oh, I've got all the kale, yay, I can handle for XYZ. But it's a resource that we've forgotten. Our land is our greatest resource right next to our people. So what are we doing to make sure that that property is being used for the good of the community, not just the next building?
When we talk about cooperatives and the food system, a lot of times I think what people first think about are farmer-owned cooperatives. And that is an important part of the food system. And what I want to talk about for just a second are worker-owned cooperatives. During the pandemic, we saw this, the Great Resignation, this nationwide rethinking by essential workers who were often in the food system, working at grocery stores, working at restaurants, people who were saying, oh, I am being called an essential worker, and yet I'm being mistreated in my work, I'm being underpaid in my work, I don't receive benefits as a part of my work. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to walk away from this and try to build my own path to meet my financial needs and my family's financial needs. And I think that is a place where cooperatives and the cooperative model has a real opportunity to step in and say, there are ways of working together to create sustainable businesses. A restaurant can be owned by a collective of workers, the wait staff and the cooks in the kitchen. A restaurant doesn't have to have a single person or a corporation that's its owner. That involves people talking to each other. They have to have some meetings. It starts to look like broccoli on the plate, and people are giving it like the side eye because it sounds like a lot of work. And I think there are, in that moment, in that pandemic moment, and the time that's been coming after it, where people are really seeing with clear eyes the extreme society-wide and individual negative impacts of the way that we have designed a lot of work in this country, that broccoli of having to engage with each other for democratic decision-making has the cheese sauce on top of creating safe, fair, dignified work that is more resilient in the face of future disasters and future downturns, because it's not just based on profit and not extractive, but instead it exists to support the workplace itself. It exists because the people who work there need a safe, fair, stable place to work. And so if they can't pay themselves as much for a short time because there's a supply chain issue somewhere that means they have to close their doors 3 days out of the week, they can make that choice because they're the owners, they're the boss. They can say, we want to outlast this brief moment to keep this special workplace. And what we're seeing around the country, and even in Texas, is a movement towards workplaces that care about fairness, that sort of Trojan horse of people's values into the workplace, where you don't have to leave the part of yourself that has values and ethics and a concern for your community at home when you go to work, but you just bring that with you and you make that part of your workday.
So, this is a common theme in the Food Summit, this idea of values-based interactions, values-based procurement, values-based purchasing, understanding understanding the fact that agriculture is heavily subsidized by harms to the environment, by cheap labor, and harms to our fellow community members. And then of course the value there, what we're trying to do is ask people to also care and pay a premium price for premium products, right? And so, or that they shop at places that are community owned, or and so these, as we all know, is a little bit counterculture currently. I think it's changing a little bit, but there is a sense of triage, right? Because especially here in the Rio Grande Valley, where we know that food insecurity, economic insecurity, sometimes housing insecurity is so prevalent in our region. And our students here at UT-RGV, students across the area, deal with these challenges every day. And sometimes it's even hard to, for example, focus on your studies when you don't really know how much food you have at home or where you're going to get your next meal. And so let me ask you just a really honest question. There is a general sense of urgency. Sometimes it's for organizations like yours. There is also, it can lead to a sense of inadequacy sometimes, or not, that's not the right word, like burnout in an area where like we can't, there's no way we can do it. So I want to ask you guys just more of a personal question, like how do you guys overlook that? What do you guys do to just kind of look past this kind of like, are we going to even win? What does that mean? And like, how do you just keep on moving forward? So I'll start with you, Alexis.
Well, first off, what I really find, I'm passionate about teaching the youth. So that's the first thing that I start thinking about is the kids. As a mother of 3, I want my kids to have the best. So if you're thinking like, okay, these families are in need of something or need resources, I feel you're just going to give it your all, you know, just do what you can to provide for your community. And, I mean, I just feel like, you know, just give it your all, really. I mean, yeah.
How do I fill my cup, I think is what you're asking first, right? I think, how do I feel? So I just started learning. I'm 50 years old and I just started learning how to fill my cup, but that came through a lot of hard work because I'm very passionate about serving my community. I was born and raised in Brownsville, and when I came to this organization, I learned the need, the chronic disease, and how it was affecting our area. So in order for me to be out here sitting in a panel or be advocating for my community, I had to practice what I preach, right? So I just recently started understanding this, but it also, the reason that happened was because I gained capacity in my organization, and I was able to, instead of wearing the multiple hats, I was able to trust my colleagues that they were supporting the same passion as the organization to be able to move forward. And people sense your energy. People sense that energy when you're around them, even if it's community or participants. They understand that they're empathetic towards you and you're empathetic towards them at the same time. So very relatable, right? So I felt like I became very relatable to my community. I understood. I knew that I was very relatable. I also come from first-generation college graduates, and my dad worked in the fields in California and a large family. But I also was very empathetic. So I just started learning how to do that in order to be able to serve others. And I don't think we talk about that enough. And thank you for pointing it out and putting it on the table, because it's important. If you are leaders, the previous panel, I turned around and told Shadi, my deputy director, I said, oh, that's my hope. That's the next hope for the next generation, so that I can drop the mic and keep on going, and I'm hopeful that they can continue with the work. But yeah, it's kind of filling your cup first before serving others.
Thank you so much for making that point. I think I want to start there too, in terms of my personal sustenance and being able to keep going with this work. It is in large part because the Texas Cooperative Center is part of the university. We're funded with USDA grant funds that are for cooperative development. So I, as a person, and my colleagues have a safe, fair, stable job. We have health insurance. Those basic needs are met. So that fear, that tightness in your stomach and in the back of your neck when you're not sure if you're going to be able to provide for your family, that isn't draining my energy for this work. And we're the only federally funded, institutionally supported cooperative development center in the whole state of Texas. There are other people doing this work, but they don't have that same security. And so I want to first of all say, that kind of security lays the foundation for longevity in work. And then in terms of satisfaction with the work that we're doing, we're playing a long game. We are filling a bathtub with droplets of water. We're planting seeds. And we see sometimes suddenly something flowers that's been sort of growing underground for a long time, and that feels really great. But I think what I try to keep my eyes on is, are the seeds that I'm planting the best quality seeds that I know how to plant, and not looking so much at for those big end results, but just making sure those seeds are really good.
I think the biggest part of being able to continue is knowing that I don't do it alone, that I don't carry the weight of this. And I may not see the fruit. I may not get to be the person who harvests. Who, in the previous panel, it's like the best day is harvest, and you get to bring it all in. Sometimes you don't get to be the one who harvests. And so that is sometimes a relief, because he also talked about harvesting at the right time being scary, and having the exact right time. not doing it alone and not pretending we can do it alone or pretending that our way is the only way. That's a relief to have people carry you and to have people walk alongside you when you're not willing to stop walking yet and be like, okay, when she drops, we got her. That's the biggest piece of having peace, is that it won't be mine alone to carry. That means I alone don't fail. I alone don't get all the credit. And that's a rest right there.
So I think we have some time for questions from the audience. I think that there's some note cards out there if you guys want to have questions. As you guys are penning those questions, I would just like to kind of respond. Vero, it's interesting that you mentioned that, it's important that we can feed ourselves or keep ourselves hydrated, fill your own cups before we can make sure that others have that. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. And it's one of the things I talk about quite a bit here in the Rio Grande Valley, because when you look at the productivity of our area, we have the potential to feed ourselves, right? I mean, there are very few places in the country, in the world, that can still do that. My graduate student Mackenzie's from Hawaii, and Hawaii used to be an economy that they were all 100% self-sufficient, being an island. And I heard yesterday that Hawaii has 5 days of food. So if they were ever cut off, that they would only have 5 days before they had to figure out what else they could do, which happened in effect with COVID, right? In the Rio Grande Valley, depending on the time of year, I mean, you could say, hey, if anything, we have a lot of food growing in our region, and yet we still can't feed ourselves, right? And so the amazing work that you guys do is that you are finding ways to feed our community ourselves, right? Whether it be like, setting up a food bank model that's unlike others that have a lot more restrictions, or whether it's finding, and pivoting, finding multiple ways of addressing food insecurity in your community through either a market, through other programs that build capacity, or whether it's finding ways to cooperate with others so that we can sustain ourselves. I think that's an important message, right? Because often we talk about agriculture, and some of the arguments for business as usual models is that no, we have to feed. It's because we have to feed the world. We need to use more technologies to boost production so that we can feed everyone else. But the truth is that we have to feed ourselves first, right? Or at least look for ways that we can nourish ourselves through food or through spiritual interactions, through fellowship, through community. And so I just wanted to applaud the work that you guys do. You must hear this every day, but you have to know how important it is that we have these examples, especially for our audience, because I think at any given time we're looking for an alternative, and we never know when that next time is going to be forced on us where we just can't get food at the grocery store. I think this is part of the reason why we wanted to have you guys here on stage. Is personally, as your colleague, I wanted to just also thank you for this amazing work. And if any of that kind of nourishment of community is necessary, I mean, we at least you guys have each other and this community in the audience to draw upon. So I just wanted to say that we do have a couple of questions from the audience. Well, first, I think that this is going to be a statement and maybe a prompt. So it says here, I wanted to thank organizations like all your organizations that give the small farmer, growers, and producers the opportunity to sell their products. Well, where other business as usual models, like organizations, large organizations, big food distributors, find it hard to work with the small producer because of regulations. There's a lot that we have to do in terms of advocacy for policies, changes, and I know that your organization has grown to a point where you can get the personnel to help advocate that for at least on the municipal level, and now even on the state level. I want you to maybe just talk a little bit about how important it is and what a privilege it is to be able to, even elevate your work to a point where you're not only trying to fill the immediate needs, but you're also trying to work within the system to make these tweaks and changes that are necessary.
Yes, it's important to recognize that it didn't happen overnight again, right? This is the first year that we were able to go to the state capitol and talk about and advocate for double up SNAP dollars, right? In Brownsville, we have been working with Sustainable Food Center, that is our organization that has helped develop the Brownsville Wellness Coalition. Again, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel, so Sustainable Food Center has been around since 1976, and they've been doing such a great job, and they've supported an organization like Brownsville Wellness Coalition. And for the first time, we were able to go with them and American Heart Association and advocate at the state level. I'm talking about the importance of double up SNAP dollars. Brownsville Farmers Market is one of the farmers market in South Texas that gives out the most double up dollars, right? So we are also in the transition of learning what that advocacy is. But for me, personally, I think it's important for me to advocate for my people, for my community, por mi gente. It's important to understand for those folks that don't have a voice to be able to go to a state level or to a national level and talk about what is really happening in the real South Texas, right? In the real South Texas. So we talk about acknowledging and putting the understanding that Brownsville and Hidalgo County and Cameron County is the South Texas that it needs the help, that needs the resources, that needs the support. So I'm also learning and just excited about the national level and being able to advocate and talk about those uncomfortable conversations, but very, very important so that we can bring back those resources here.
Thank you. We have a question for Annalise. Okay, so hearing from Sodexo earlier today and also from one of our ISDs, it seems difficult to actually source from many small farmers. And so in what role can co-ops play in making it possible for companies like Sodexo and others to perhaps better source from local small growers?
Great, thank you. I think there are multiple ways. So a co-op is really just a business that's owned by a group of people to meet their shared need. So we've been talking a lot about aggregation as a tool to help smaller growers access larger buyers because you're bringing together the produce from multiple small growers. So an aggregator could be an individual who just chooses to go into business, or it could be a cooperatively owned entity that's owned by the farmers, and then they design it to meet their needs. That means the farmers have a role in setting prices, which can be extremely important. And it means that the buyers have the opportunity to have a conversation and a negotiation with a single representative of multiple farmers so that they're not having to have a negotiation with 7 local farms. They can have a negotiation with one farmers cooperative. And then on the other side, and I think this was mentioned in the panel, that buyers can also create cooperative entities along with, that include producers. And so you could have a jointly owned multi-stakeholder cooperative where the shared need that's identified could be something like, we need more locally grown food available to children in schools. So that's the shared goal. And then the buyers and the sellers work together to design a business solution to that problem. And that's your cooperative. There are a lot of ways to sort of approach the question. I think the key to all of them is really clearly defining the expectations, those needs, and then the expectations, so that when someone joins a cooperative, they know what they're going to be expected to provide in terms of engagement and investment, and they know what they might expect to to get out of it. Making those expectations really clear, I think, is how this alternative business model of a cooperative really makes itself palatable and easy to understand for other business owners and people doing business in the community, where you're not asking your buyer to compromise the way they understand selling in order to work with you. You're just flipping the script on what it means to you and your fellow producers to engage in selling.
Can you tell us, so I'm not aware of very many co-ops in RGV. Perhaps Cently is one of them, with the 4 farmers that you guys have been working together on a cooperative CSA. Are there any others in our RGV, and what are other possible co-ops that can be developed here?
Any business could be a co-op. Any business could be a co-op. So that's the second answer. Anything. In terms of co-ops that already exist here, so when I think about co-ops in Texas, I think of kind of 2 big buckets. One is been around a long time, really big, has their own advocacy organization that goes to the state capitol in legislative years. So those are like Magic Valley Electric and the big grain cooperatives that exist. Cotton gins, a lot of cotton gins are co-ops from way back. Those, we don't usually work with those folks. They don't need our help. They already have a whole system where they're supporting themselves. And then we have this big bucket of new emerging small farms, small businesses that are cooperating. Cooperatives don't always last for ever and ever, just like any business. So we've developed multiple co-ops within the RGV over the years. There are 2 that come to mind that are existing and thriving right now. One is Frontera Farmers Collective, and so that's a group of farmers also connected with the agroecology program, who have come together and sell produce in a shared multi-farm CSA. And then in Laredo, they're also called Frontera, but so not exactly in the valley, but close by, a Frontera grocery cooperative where people identified an area of inaccessibility of food and created a grocery store, a retail opportunity around that shared need. My colleague Blanca Delgado, who's in the audience, and I do a lot of work throughout the valley to put the word out about the cooperative model and to introduce the way that cooperation can work to, again, to create safe, fair, stable jobs. And so a lot of our work, like I said, it's a long, slow, drips in the bucket kind of thing. We do a lot of events like this, events at churches, events in Colonias, where we're meeting people saying, this is the cooperative model. Let's have a conversation about your shared needs. And to get to that conversation about shared needs takes a while. It's multiple visits because of that trust building. So and we also work throughout the state. And so our main area of focus is here in the valley, but our actual service area is the entire state of Texas. So Blanca and I have a lot of ground to cover.
Well, we're at the end of our time. This is a fantastic conversation, very stimulating. The next time we'll probably have to do it at Michelle's table because she said that everyone's welcome at her table. Yeah. And so what I just like to take a moment and again, thank you all once again, not just for being present today and sharing it with the audience, both here and the live stream audience, but also for the tremendous amount of work that you guys do and the commitment that you guys show to your own communities. It's very admirable, and it is a quality that I'm proud to have seen it both in this panel and also in the previous one, which was, to me, I had a feeling that those young kids were going to steal the show, but you guys were really good. They were a good headliner to you guys. I mean, you guys as the headliner. So right now we're going to take a break for lunch, and I think Hernan might have some instruction on how we're going to do lunch, because lunch is not only going to be very delicious, but we're also going to talk about some of the food that you guys will be having. So, but with that, let's give everyone on the stage
you for
a
having
big
us.
round of applause.